Distant for northern and western Scotland, and the wind picks up as well. Further south, with a bit more of a breeze, a bit more cloud, certainly a frost-free start to the weekend, 8s and 9s as we start the day on the thermometers. But a lot of cloud and that keen breeze sticking around for Saturday in the south. Further north, wet and windy, heavy rain for the West Highlands for the first part of Saturday. That wet weather sinking through Northern Ireland, Northern England, and then arriving into Wales by the middle of the afternoon. But the front is weakening, so not a huge amount of rain expected in these places. The wind, though, does pick up behind the weather front. A very windy night indeed to come for northern parts of the UK, particularly northern Scotland, where, combined with some large waves, well, that could cause some coastal impacts. But it is a milder weekend for all of us.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Something wrong, I probably would have just...
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, live from COP26. It's Youth and Education Day here at COP. Greta Thunberg will be marching through the streets of Glasgow with what she claims are 100,000 people supporting her cause. But also inside this centre, Nadeem Zwahi, the Education Secretary, is here with new initiatives for the classroom. But is it politicising teachers? Does it risk scaring children? We'll be asking those questions to the Education Secretary in just a few minutes' time. Also, we'll be talking about the week in Westminster with Michael Fabricant. We'll be talking about industry voices from the Concrete Association here in COP26. And also, we'll be talking about the cost of net zero with the Global Warming Policy Foundation. All that and so much more coming up in 5 minutes' time.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 9 o'clock. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zwahi, has admitted the government made a mistake when it combined a vote on disciplinary procedures with the Tory MP's suspension. Former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson faced a 30-day ban for breaching lobbying rules, but a Conservative vote blocked the recommendation. He resigned following the decision to hold a second vote. Mr Zwahi says the government can't be complacent in the face of perceptions of sleaze. We'll be speaking to the Education Secretary on To The Point later this hour. Yorkshire County Cricket Club chairman Roger Hutton has resigned with immediate effect. That's after the club was suspended from hosting international and major matches in the wake of Azim Rafiq's racism allegations. Hutton has been asked to appear before a select committee to explain the club's handling of the claims. He says frustration at board members and senior management led to his decision. Brexit Minister Lord Frost will meet one of Brussels' top officials later to address disputes over the Northern Ireland Protocol and fishing rights. It follows a meeting with the French Europe Minister Clément Beaune in Paris yesterday. The diplomatic storm was triggered by a feud over licences for French vessels operating in UK waters. Earlier this week, a Scottish trawler caught up in the row was released by French authorities after being held for 6 days. British Airways parent company IAG has warned it's likely to make a £2.5 billion loss this year. BA says passenger numbers are starting to improve but remain well below pre-pandemic levels. The airline says the reopening of transatlantic travel will help the company return to profit next year, and it plans to fly about 60% of its pre-pandemic capacity in the current quarter. Average UK house prices hit a record high in October, reaching £270,000. According to data compiled by Halifax, property values increased by £2,500 during the month. Wales remains the strongest performer across the UK, with annual house prices inflation of 12.9%. Several factors, including the recent stamp duty cut and buyers seeking larger properties, are believed to be behind the rise. UK shopper footfall was higher than any other major European economy in October, in an encouraging sign for retailers ahead of Christmas. Total UK footfall was down by 13.7% compared with 2 years ago and was an improvement on September's figures. Retail parks were particularly popular, almost reaching pre-pandemic levels, while shopping centre footfall also went up. Retail consultant Andy Sumpter told GB News the chance to interact with products was partly behind the increase.
People are definitely choosing to shop early. And there's lots of reasons around that, but I think there's a growing confidence in going out to stores. You know, we kind of led the way with vaccination rates, and we had a slow start to the year, but obviously things are looking better, so people are feeling more confident to go out in stores. And I think we've missed that human contact. So, you know, you can't beat seeing products, touching and feeling products.
Campaigners are warning the lifestyles of the rich are plundering the planet and putting the world in graver danger from climate change. Oxfam is criticising the use of space trips, saying they are irreversibly damaging the environment. This year, actor William Shatner went on a space flight, as did businessman Sir Richard Branson, while Elon Musk is promising to take humans to Mars. Icebergs, well, they don't usually make it as far south as Glasgow, but one has arrived at COP26. The 4-ton block of ice has been shipped in from Greenland by scientific activist group Arctic Base Camp as a visible reminder of the scale of the climate crisis. 1,000 litres of glacial meltwater collected from the fjords will also be given out in bottles to delegates. I'll be back with the headlines for you in half an hour. Back to Tom and the briefing.
It's Youth and Public Empowerment Day here at COP26, and there are new announcements from this government, indeed new initiatives. A new style of Duke of Edinburgh scheme, not a Duke of Edinburgh scheme, but a different sort of scheme that try and get kids involved in environmentalism, not just climate change, but greening up the community as well. But also putting green issues at the core of the curriculum. Lots to be discussed. I'm delighted to say that we can discuss it all with the Education Secretary himself. Nadeem Zwahi can join me live from COP26 right now. Welcome to the programme. First of all, can you explain a little bit about what's changing about the UK curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. So two things. One, at primary school, it's the new model primary science curriculum. So giving primary school teachers the tools to be able to deliver evidence-based, really good quality primary education for young minds. And then I'm also launching our sustainability and climate change strategy in draft. And then I will work with teachers, with the teaching profession, so we get it right by April of next year, to give them the additional tools to teach evidence-based climate issues in science, so through the STEM subjects, through geography and citizenship. And as you mentioned, the Climate Leaders Awards, these are sort of taking the best of the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince's Trust, bringing it all together into giving young people an agency. And what I hope will happen, and this is me speaking as an engineer, is not only will they continue to campaign and press other world leaders on this, but also be inspired to be part of the solution through becoming scientists, becoming engineers, leading the innovation in fusion technology, in hydrogen, in offshore wind, in solar, in the future, so that actually what we do is inspire through education and empower through education.
Now, a lot of people will be worried about that term campaign and worry that potentially this might be a political direction that teachers may be instructed to take on. What safeguards will there be to stop potentially activist teachers really scaring an already frightened generation?
Well, I think a couple of things. Well, I think in many ways the generation are leading the way. They're the ones who are highlighting some of the risks. As my Prime Minister has said, if we think that they are at the moment upset with us. So my daughter, who's 9, came in on Monday and said, "Dad, you better be going to that meeting in Scotland." I'm like, "Mia, it's bigger than that. It's a summit and it's huge, and I am going, I promise you." She said, "Good, I'm glad."
Do you worry that over half of young people in this country, over half of 16 to 24-year-olds, think that humanity is doomed?
So
is that a rational point of view to have?
So I do worry, but as the PM said, if we don't fix it now, they'll be even more angry with us, and rightly so, if we don't do this. Now, the really great thing, which I hope I can convey both through the work we're doing on the sustainability and climate change strategy, on the work we've just discussed, is to be able to say there's hope. Where is the hope? One, we as adults are already doing something about this. So when we took on the presidency, only 30% of the world's economy had signed up to net zero. It went up to 80% before we got to Glasgow. When we're here, it's now 90% of the world economy have signed up to net zero. Right? Deforestation, 85% of forests in the world will be protected, and I hope enhanced. Cars, more commitments on taking hydrocarbons out of transport, out of cars for us for 2030, many countries by 2035. And of course, cash. A lot of countries, and this is where actually young people have got a really important point, who haven't been chucking CO2 into the air because they're not as advanced as we are or as industrialized, don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the money to be able to make some of these transitions. So giving them that that 100 billion commitment a year is really, really important.
No, you're making a positive case there.
Yeah.
Why on earth hasn't the Prime Minister been making that positive case? Why has he been talking about doomsday machines? Why has he been so pessimistic? It's so unlike him in the last 7 days. For Boris to be not boosterish, but pessimistic.
I would urge you, and you are good at this because I know you follow the evidence, read Hansard from Wednesday, because I was sitting next to him throughout his statement to Parliament on G20 and on COP, and he was using these exact words. In fact, I am plagiarising probably by using his own language, that there is real hope around the technologies that are now available, the science, as well as, of course, the immediate work we're doing on coal, on cash, on cars and on trees. Now, you asked a really important question. How do you deliver hope? I think you deliver hope through having a curriculum that is rich, that gives teachers evidence-based tools to be able to teach and inspire. So it's not just about being angry, it's being then empowered to do something.
Absolutely, and on those evidence-based tools, on that empowerment of teachers, what safeguards specifically are there against, for example, schools? There's one school, the Ramsgate Arts Primary School down in Kent, that encouraged students to stick on slogans and symbols of Extinction Rebellion onto children's clothes. Now, Extinction Rebellion is an extreme group founded by a man who's written incredibly unsavoury things and believes that billions of people will die in short order. Is that acceptable for that school to have done?
No, it's not. I'm very clear on that, right? One, schools should always remember impartiality, Right? Any contested theory should not be promoted, or if they are, they should be, depending on the year group, people should hear both sides of any argument. But very importantly, it should be very much around the evidence, and impartiality is really important, and not to politicise this in any way. And political groups like Extinction Rebellion should not be being promoted in any school.
Well, that is very, very clear from you. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning on The Briefing, Education Secretary Nadeem Zawahi. One final little question. Booster jabs. Of course, in your previous job, you were the jab supremo, and were deeply, deeply successful in rolling out that first wave. The second wave seems to be a little bit stuttering. These booster jabs not going as quickly as many people would like. What advice do you have to the people who are now running the programme?
So, one, they're doing a great job. There are now 500 more sites than we had in phase one. Which is great, so that more people can just walk in and get their booster jab. We are over 8.3 million the last time I looked at the numbers a couple of days ago, which is fantastic. People have been boosted. Big target, we want to get to about 35 million people who are over 50 who need that protection. By the way, the protection it gives you is a quantum more. And actually not taking it means you are leaving yourself exposed, because the waning from the first phase of vaccination is quite, it does accelerate after 6 months, certainly. So it's really important that people get the boost.
The numbers aren't high enough now, are they?
They are. I think they're doing well. I think they can keep going, because actually now you can walk in. The system has also been enhanced because you can book online, so that you can actually schedule it into your week or your day. Lots of effort going into this, as well as, of course, vaccinating the 12 to 15-year-olds.
Was it an embarrassment yesterday in Parliament that the Leader of the Commons had to U-turn on a bit of a move to try and mark your own homework?
I think to the contrary. I tell you for why. If you just think about what's happened over the last 24, 48 hours, when we came to Parliament, actually, if you look at the substantive measure, it is about creating a fairer system, a system with a right to appeal, as we have in many professions in this country.
But retrospectively doing that was a bit of an issue.
But, right. So conflating that with a specific case of Owen Paterson was a mistake. I think to reflect within 24 hours, and by the morning have the Leader of the House, and I take collective responsibility for this, by the way, to come forward and say, look, we made a mistake to conflate the two, the really important one to get right, and we need cross-party negotiation on this, and I urge all my fellow parliamentarians from whichever party to shed their politics. Let's not play tit for tat. Let's get this right for generations, and actually for your viewers, for the country, to have confidence in the system of scrutiny of MPs. A right of appeal actually is about our values as a nation, right? People should have that fairness built into the system. Conflating it was wrong. It was right to come forward and say, actually, you know what, we made a mistake. And I'd rather trust a leader who can recognise that within 24 hours and come back and say, look, we made a mistake on this, than someone who will just plough on ahead.
Certainly does seem to be a theme of this government, that it decides one thing one day and quickly changes its mind when it gets it wrong. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave it for others to decide. But for now, Nadeem Zawahi, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News.
Thank you very much.
Now, turning to some of the other elements of COP26, of course, the big theme of this conference has been many more countries have signed up to what's called net zero. Of course, meaning that on net, CO2 emissions go down to zero. One person who's been studying what this all means is Harry Wilkinson, who's head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation, and I'm delighted to say can join me now. First of all, Harry, have we all understood, particularly in countries that are quite wealthy, that have high standards of living, have we understood the costs that go into decarbonisation?
Well, not exactly. And the government hasn't been clear about exactly how much it will cost. We've looked at the issue and we think it's going to be in excess of £3 trillion. And just looking at decarbonising housing, for example, you've got to essentially replace all of the gas boilers in the country with heat pumps, with hydrogen boilers potentially. And these technologies aren't quite ready. And you need to do an awful lot of insulation work as well. So just within insulating houses, you're looking at a bill over £1 trillion. So that's even in Western countries. The idea of developing countries who desperately need to industrialise, desperately need jobs, growth, economic development, the idea of them going to net zero is even more extraordinary.
I suppose one of the big questions about this whole agenda is that it was pushed through in Parliament with, in a very short space of time, in the dying days of the Theresa May administration. And it doesn't seem like there was much debate. It doesn't seem like many people discussed this, and suddenly it became policy. Where was the discussion? Should there be more discussion, or is this now, are we really set on this course? It seems like the UK is pushing for this, not only domestically, but around the world.
Well, yes, it was nodded through as secondary legislation, and therefore it only had very limited debate in Parliament. And many people have been raising this idea of a referendum on net zero. And the Prime Minister was actually asked about it during COP just a couple of days ago. And in response to that, he said that people recognised this needed to be done because they looked at the fires, they looked at the floods, they looked at the hurricanes, all getting much worse around the world. But this was actually inaccurate. When we look at the science around climate change, we find that actually the IPCC reports say there's low confidence in any global trends in flooding, low confidence in any trends in hurricanes. And about fire, they say that while fire weather might be getting worse, the satellite data is actually showing that there's less fire in the global landscape than there was before, because we're becoming better at managing fires. And I think this goes back to the point you were making about climate anxiety in children earlier, to Nadeem Zahawi. We've got our politicians who should really be on top of the facts, scaremongering children. Do we really trust this new system of climate education when we already have a problem of children thinking the world is going to end, when that's actually so far from the actual science on climate change? So we need politicians to actually lead by example and be on top of the facts around climate change and not be peddling these alarmist lines.
That we, on the amount of lives that we can save when these big disasters happen. Fewer lives are now lost to these storms, although I think that there is pretty conclusive evidence showing now that a hotter climate will lead to it. May not be leading to it right now, but it will lead to more of these events. I suppose the question is, what costs more? Dealing with those events and dealing with higher sea levels, building the seawalls, building the stronger infrastructure, the storm drains, all of that. Does that cost more than getting to net zero? I suppose on that balanced question, it is rather finely balanced for a country like the UK.
Well, the problem is no one's actually done the analysis. There hasn't been a robust cost-benefit analysis. And on many decarbonisation measures, we're spending actually far beyond what's called the social cost of carbon. So that's what would be the damage caused by emitting 1 tonne of CO2. So if our policies are much more expensive than that, then they don't make sense. It doesn't make sense to spend more on a problem than any damage that it's potentially going to do. And there's just not been that robust analysis that we would expect. The Treasury's cost of net zero review didn't actually come up with any of its own figures on the costs and benefits of net zero. And that's really sad, because that work, we were waiting years for that to arrive, and then they didn't even produce the numbers. So a lot more work needs to be done to actually work this out. We need a broader range of perspectives to inform this. We can't just have the Climate Change Committee, which has been sort of a cheerleader for green policies. We actually need different perspectives as well to inform a broader analysis of the costs of these policies.
Evidence base. I think it's remarkable that we haven't done the costing work. I would love to see a cost-benefit analysis. I think this is something that more people should take up in Parliament, and I know that you work closely with the Net Zero Scrutiny Group. I hope that they'll be taking this forward as the weeks and months progress. That data, that understanding, that reality-based analysis is ever so important. But for now, Harry Wilkinson, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning on GB News. Now, here at COP, it's not just world leaders, it's not just activists, it's not just journalists even. There are also some businesses too. And some of those businesses actually represent heavy industry, something that you might not necessarily expect to be here at a climate conference. Well, the CEO of a large trade association, the Global Cement and Concrete Association, Thomas Gilliot, caught up with me yesterday to talk about what on earth a big heavy industry is doing here at COP.
Big corporations like ours, big sectors like ours, are more and more going into the net zero on committee. But our sectors cannot do it alone. So we need to engage us with the value chain, with our customers, with our suppliers. That's the whole thing to be transformed. And of course, with the policymakers. We have a number of policy asks, and these are fundamental to be said.
Of course, there's going to be a disadvantage, isn't there, if you're a company that stands alone and saying, we're going to do all of these green things, all of these expensive things, all of these environmental things. That can really put a business behind other ones that choose to not do that. How do you square that circle?
Well, we are an association of different enterprises, or different companies. However, I mean, for us, we are very clear. I mean, we need to be optimistic on that. In the changing world, the ones that move first in this, that innovate on the net zero, are the ones that will be the winners of tomorrow. So here we are competing against other building materials, and into our sector, our companies or the members are competing between themselves. But I think we have to take examples of what happened before in the world. Digital. Could we be not digital 20 years ago? Impossible. You have companies like, to give an example, Nokia, that didn't want to invest on make this digital transformation for different reasons, and they lost ultimately the battle of the mobile phone. We say we will be into the net zero race. We are there, we have solutions, we have a very clear roadmap, and our member says we will be part of that race and we will lead it.
Now, many wealthy Western countries have been seeing deindustrialization over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Countries like the UK have seen heavy industry leave, and some of those jobs in, for example, steel production or indeed concrete production are going overseas. Is there a worry here that if we try and over-regulate some of these companies that exist in the Western world, really what's going to happen is that other sorts of companies in less developed parts of the world are going to do this cheaper, faster, and probably more carbon intensively anyway?
Well, the case of concrete is a little bit different because you are a very local industry. It's a material that is very inexpensive and very heavy. So the value of transporting it is very relative. However, you're right. And that's why we have one of our policy asks is basically around giving a price to carbon, right? We say we want to give a price to carbon, but this should be accompanied by carbon leakage mechanism. Like in Europe, we have this CBAM system, which basically will protect when you want to go and give a price to carbon, they will protect the industry for a limited period of time from the industry leaving the country and then exporting basically your production of CO2, and this would have absolutely no sense. So what we basically want to have is as much as possible and as soon as possible a common price for carbon.
Around the whole world, a global carbon tax.
Carbon tax or whatever. I'm not arguing of the solution that needs to be put in place, but listen, we are an enterprise. We are companies. Companies, what do they understand? They understand the bottom line. If you want to get rid of carbon, you need to give carbon a price. And that's when people will start to get rid of carbon and to phase out the carbon.
And I suppose that solution, as opposed to more prescriptive government measures like banning things or trying to pick winners, putting a flat price on carbon allows the market to innovate around these sort of things.
Absolutely, that's a very fair point. Now, this does not prevent from doing other measures, accompanying measures to develop. I give you one example. One of the big issues we had was on the development of low carbon material, because the norm was not authorizing the solution. And for some reason, which are difficult to understand, but the development of the new norm took 7 years. So 7 years to authorize material that have 30-40% less carbon. This cannot be. We need to accelerate all that. We have 30 years, 10 years to act. We have to act now, and we have to make all this change as soon as possible.
And just finally, do you think that other industries are really getting on board with this? Is this conference marking a step change in how the world, and in particular, how industry around the world is treating this issue?
No, I think so. That's what we see. I mean, you see more and more on commitment. And I think the topic is not anymore, on the what are the big commitments that the global leaders want to make. No, we are in the action. Now we know we need to do it. We waited 30 years, there was a long debate on climate septic, whatever. This is past. Now the question is, how do we do it? How quick can we do it? And how do we make all these things possible? And we really have these 10 years when we need to prove the business model.
Thomas Guillot, CEO of the Concrete and Cement Association there, talking about the industry view on COP26. Well, I have some news to bring you all literally in the last 2 minutes. Owen Paterson has ceased to be an MP. The way that MPs resign, they can't officially resign, they have to take on another job. And the archaic job that Owen Paterson, unpaid of course, has taken on in order to leave his job as an MP is the steward and bailiff of the Manor of Northstead. Well, to talk through those parliamentary peculiarities, I'm delighted to be joined now by Michael Fabricant, of course, the Conservative MP for Lichfield. Welcome to the programme, Michael. Now, you've served in the House of Commons with Owen Paterson for a long time. What are your thoughts initially on this breaking news that he is no longer an MP?
Well, it is very sad, and I feel very sorry for him for the way the circumstances played out. And of course, the last 48 hours have appeared, I think, to the general public to be rather chaotic. And the press have sort of gathered together and started saying it's all a U-turn. But in fact, I don't know whether you want to discuss it now, Tom, but I think one of the things that it's worth doing is just looking at the genesis of how this all happened over the last month or so and how we got into this position.
Well, what was that genesis? Because I understand that many MPs feel that the system of standards is broken, that there isn't a proper right for appeal, that it's too lax on many members, that it's too harsh on some members. Clearly, there's a general sense of frustration around this system. Indeed, another of your former colleagues, Rob Roberts, the MP for Delyn, seemed to have been let off with a slap on the wrist for being accused of very unsavoury things. Clearly, something needed to change, but understandably, people look at this case, look at the specifics of it being attached to one MP, look at how it was retrospective and think that is not on.
Well, let's indeed look at the genesis. So about 3 weeks ago, The Telegraph started a campaign with the very respected journalist Charles Moore talking about all the problems with the way the whole inquiry was conducted. And it was flawed. I mean, first of all, the system is flawed. You've got one person who is judge and jury and a committee who then rubber stamps that person's decision with no right of appeal. What happened in this case was you had, first of all, that person, the Commissioner for Standards, saying before the inquiry even began that she thought Owen Paterson was guilty. And incidentally, I'm not making any judgment at all and never have done whether he's guilty or not. But, you know, she starts off by saying that. In a court of law, if a judge had done that, he would have been removed from the case, possibly struck off as a judge. Nevertheless, she did it. Then the report contained a whole series of factual inaccuracies, and 17 witnesses who wanted to appear and give evidence were forbidden from doing so. They had to do bits in writing, which meant there was no cross-examination. So the whole system was botched. And I wrote to the Deputy Chief Whip, I WhatsApped him, the Deputy Chief Whip last Saturday to say, look, I've just seen the motion laid by the government, which basically said that we're going to suspend Owen Paterson for 30 days. And I said, look, I don't know the rights or wrongs of the case, but the way the whole thing has been organised has been terrible. And I can't vote for this. I probably would have just abstained, actually, because I didn't know what was going to happen. Then the next thing that happened was that Andrea Leadsom, very helpfully, I thought, put down a motion which said, come on, let's look at the whole system because it's broke. And you know what occurs to me is MPs seem to be very good, or they think they're very good, at legislating for everybody else. But when it comes to setting up a system for themselves, they're pretty useless, I think. So that's why I voted, and I was very happy to vote for Andrea Leadsom's amendment. And what would that have done? That would have set up a select committee and there are lots of select committees in the House of Commons, a select committee which would have looked at how these inquiries should be conducted in future. And in the meantime, just temporarily held over on the decision to punish Owen Paterson. And it was just a temporary halt, not,
although many
letting him off the hook.
Exactly the
Sorry, were you coming in, Tom?
You understand that many MPs have gone through the same system, and to retrospectively change that system does look wrong, especially when the argument that Jacob Rees-Mogg made to the House of Commons with regard to Rob Roberts, the Conservative MP, or the former Conservative MP for Delyn, who has now lost the whip over claims of sexual harassment. The Conservative Party said they couldn't change the rules retrospectively to allow the constituents of Delyn to have a by-election, and yet very happily supported an amendment to retrospectively change the rules with regard to Owen Paterson. Do you see a double standard there?
Well, I understand why people feel that. I think it is because, as I've already explained, it was such a botched inquiry. You really can't have the commissioner saying in advance the guy is guilty before she's even done the inquiry. And then to have factual errors in the report and not even take witnesses. I mean, that really was, to quote actually Jacob Rees-Mogg, that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. But I have no doubt, to the general public, it looks dreadful. But, justice should be done. And it has to be seen to be done. And certainly that particular inquiry, I don't think justice was done at all. And as I say, I'm not defending Owen Paterson. I'm not saying whether he's guilty or innocent. What I am saying is that the inquiry was an absolute botch. And to be frank, I think the commissioner in this instance should be ashamed of herself.
And yet the way that the government handled this all, and the U-turn and the escalation, all of the front pages, this has turned it into a much bigger story than it needed to be, and potentially has overshadowed the other big story where Parliament has not covered itself in glory this week. Of course, the former Labour MP Claudia Webb being sentenced. Of course, she threatened to throw acid over a woman, a court heard that she threatened to send indecent pictures of a woman to that woman's children. And yet this isn't on the front pages. Instead, we're talking about Owen Paterson. Has the government royally messed this up?
Well, I think with hindsight, yes. But, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Because if the opposition parties hadn't said, right, we're not going to take part in this select committee, which Parliament has now passed, if they hadn't said that, we would have gone ahead and had the select committee. Now, I think because of the resignation of Owen Paterson, and I think what probably happened was the chief whip said, look, we gave it our best shot, not to get you off, but to have a proper restructuring of the way these inquiries are done. But because now the opposition parties are not cooperating, we can't do anything else. I wouldn't even call it a U-turn, actually. I think, it's like a battle. You have a course of events, and all you can do at the end of the day is react to events. It's like a battle, it's like business, it's like everything else. So with the opposition parties saying they wouldn't take part in the select committee, we really had no choice but to say, look, there isn't going to be a select committee. Owen, the situation is now becoming impossible. So, as I say, Owen Paterson has now decided to resign. And as you quite rightly say, he's done this archaic, wonderful British practice of taking on a crown position. And when you take on a crown position, you can no longer be a member of Parliament. So that's how he has now resigned in a practical way.
Well, Michael Fabricant, thank you so much for taking us through all of those intricacies of the British parliamentary system, and indeed explaining a little bit more about what went on with this standards report. Really appreciate your time here this